Don't block the path of inquiry. Don't lay down rules that make it impossible for people to ask important questions.
Welcome to the Thought Stretchers podcast, where we hope to stretch your thinking about ideas and issues important to education. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm your host for these dialectic conversations for intellectually rigorous educators. In this episode, I'm joined by Ted Dintersmith, who was last a guest here in 2018 when we talked about his book, What School Could Be, and excellent documentary, Most Likely to Succeed. Our conversation dives into his new book, After Math, the life-changing math that schools won't teach you, and his new documentary, Multiple Choice. Ted delivers a powerful critique of traditional K-12 math, arguing that we force students to master abstract, low-level, and testable concepts that are irrelevant for their adult lives and will soon be done perfectly by AI. He warns that even students who excel in math in today's education model will be unemployable in the AI-driven future. Instead, Ted advocates for what he thinks is a much more powerful and relevant math that will be essential for making informed financial, healthcare, and civic decisions. We also discuss his new film, Multiple Choice, which promotes a career-based learning model to restore student purpose and agency. Before we get to the conversation, just a reminder that you can find more information about all of our professional learning at wegrowteachers.com. Registration for PBL Grow 26 is ongoing and filling up quickly, and our new Knowledge Rich Inquiry online course is now available, along with our other online courses, all low cost and flexible options to build foundational understandings. Please reach out to me at drew@thoughtstretchers.org if you have questions or comments. Now, here's my conversation with Ted. I am with Ted Dintersmith, and it's been several years since we last spoke. I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself or reintroduce himself. I think the last time we spoke was around your book, What School Could Be and Most Likely to Succeed, which is a documentary. You've got a new book called After Math, the life-changing math that schools won't teach you, and a new documentary that I'm anxious to hear about because I have not seen it. But welcome, Ted. Tell the folks who are listening and the savages who are watching podcasts who you are and maybe give a little potted bio.
Yeah, sure. So I spent most of my career in technology innovation. So I've seen how fast is changing and the implications of those changes on what is required to prepare kids for careers, for citizenship, and for personal well-being. And when my kids hit middle school, which was about 15 years ago, I kind of went from like really not having any interest, particularly in education, to being incredibly concerned. And the genesis of that is simple. I felt like schools, and initially it was one school, and then I started visiting more schools. It was like, no, we have an education model that pushes kids to get good at exactly what machines do perfectly. As it erodes from kids, their creativity and curiosity and audacity and agency. And I just felt like, my gosh, if that's what we're doing, we are going to pay an enormous price for that. And so that changed my life. So I left the very enjoyable, lucrative career of venture capital to take on the unbelievably exasperating negative cash flow business of trying to encourage innovation in our schools. And so, I started with the film Most Likely to Succeed that premiered almost 11 years ago, January of 2015, 11 plus years ago. But it was a Sundance premiere, great film, timeless. Then took this trip, went to every state in the country, 200 schools in a single school year, wrote the book, What School Could Be, formed the nonprofit with Sir Ken Robinson, whatschoolcouldbe.org. And then I have this new film, Multiple Choice, and a new book out. And so I think I should get a little bit of credit for perseverance because I'm on this and it's a very important priority for me. It's my life. It's my mission. And I do feel like we have a lot of kids in school today that trust adults to make good decisions on their behalf. And honestly, I think most people with influence are letting those kids down. And so I feel like those of us who see it differently have an obligation to speak out.
Yeah, and I was just trying to look. I think it was either 2017 or maybe 2018 when we last spoke, and then we have a blog piece.
The book came out early 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I bet that's when it was.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I still remember we had a great conversation, so I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, well, it's been a long and winding road since then, and I guess maybe a good place to start is to give you an opportunity. I've had a chance to read and take a look at the book, but a lot of folks may not have and probably have not. So tell folks what is the book about?
Yeah, can I hold it up? I don't know if it'll show
Sure.
up on the screen. There we go. Yeah. I'll see if I can get it just right. Well, it's a little blurry. When you read it, it is not blurry. It is quite, so I've got a ton of math in my background, and, and it goes from, high school. I went to college, ran throughout college, actually kept going, went to graduate school, got a PhD in math modeling from Stanford, then was involved in a business that made fast math processing chips. That's pretty math intensive. And then did really well in venture backing startups that largely had some math-based proprietary advantage. So that's a pretty doggone full life embedded in the world of math. And the thing that has troubled me forever is I never used any of the high school math. I mean, to get a PhD, you've got to do a bit of, abstract symbolic math. And so maybe there I used some high school math. But in my business life, running a startup that made fast math processing chips, backing math-based, startups, I never used any of it. And then when I started traveling, I would ask people about the school experiences that had the most profound impact on their lives. And there were things that people would immediately talk about that were positive. Happy to elaborate on the positives. But no one ever mentioned math class as an unbelievably elevating experience. And for many, it was traumatic. For many, they bear the scars to this day of how a particular math class often, or a high stakes math exam, made them feel dumb, right? Made them feel like they were not on the same intellectual plane with other people. And so it's been bugging me forever that so much damage is done as we immerse students in math that no adult uses, that smartphones do perfectly. I mean, like that can't be a fair priority to have in our schools, but it is, right? I mean, math is half the nation's report card, half the SAT, a major factor in whether a kid can even get a high school degree, predictive and determinative in terms of what college they get into, if in fact they want to go to college. And so it plays this outsized role. And yet, and I've put this blitz, this screen up of the basic high school math curriculum in front of audiences, combined audiences of easily 100,000 plus, and it's arc sequence, and it's the Taylor series expansion, and the chain rule, and irrational numbers, and factoring polynomials. It's all the stuff of high school math. And I'll ask adults, who here can identify something on this chart that you use regularly and can explain to others? Nothing. Crickets. It's like, wait, thousands of hours on this math esoterica that, by the way, was important in life before computers were available. Thousands of hours on this, half the SAT, an important blocking factor for life paths for many. And yet I can't find anybody who uses it. And Andrew, there are these incredibly fascinating, powerful math ideas that absolutely define our lives. And I can't find adults that know them, that understand them. And so it seemed to me like, okay, this seems like a book that needs to be written. What are the powerful math ideas that define us, explained in layperson's terms, shamelessly in the footsteps of Freakonomics, right? I mean, it's like explaining math ideas in words, not hairball equations, drawing out the way they affect us in daily life. 8 glorious chapters of ideas that any kid in middle school can understand, juxtaposed with this sea of math esoterica that blocks our life paths, that makes many feel limited, that inflicts all sorts of damage on self-esteem, all in place for one reason. It's easy to test. In our chase for data in American schools, we will put all of our priority on low-level multiple choice math questions your phone does perfectly, ignore the ideas that really matter, because somehow it makes life easier for the College Board. And like, okay, somebody needs to stand up to that. I feel math has been weaponized. I feel like it's largely playing the role of a schoolyard bully. And I certainly feel like I'm in a great position to do that. I've had people say I might be the only person who could have written this book, but I wrote it. And I think it's the most important thing other than family I'll ever do in my life. And so I hope people listening to it dive in, read the book, and let me know if they disagree. But I think it's this window to this stark contrast in our schools between what we need to do and what we do. Mm-hmm. And we need to equip everybody coming through school with these ideas that are so influential and powerful. We don't do that. And we need to get away from doing this low-level stuff that machines do perfectly, because honestly, we should care a lot more about our kids than we care about the College Board.
So you're sort of outlining a dichotomy between, sort of a real world experience application and some of the things that would be maybe categorized as sort of non-academic. And that's maybe not fair. But, when we think about math, when I think about math, I think about, especially in the context of a lot of these science of learning kinds of conversations I have been having and I think are interesting, that math, the math that they're using in lots of these research, and I think you're referring to, algebra 1, quadratic equations, these kinds of things are in my mind sort of very academic, and not that the math that you're outlining or talking about influential and powerful ideas is not academic, but maybe a bit more, I guess, real world experience, which builds on the first book and the first film, which is, sort of highlighting the idea of project-based learning and some contextualization, those kinds of things. Is that fair?
I think it's mostly fair. I would say that the math that I talk about in the book is, first of all, every chapter starts with something that middle school kids have done. So it's immensely understandable at fairly early ages. It does lend itself to very high standards. So I have a chapter, the beginning chapter is on how do you estimate something when it's not practical to count it precisely. And I start with how would young kids estimate the number of jelly beans in a jar? And there are really well thought out approaches that draw on logic and rigor and creativity. And there are poorly thought out approaches. So it's not that you don't hold kids to high standards. It's just that when you introduce the degree of creativity, which I think runs through the math that matters, when creativity enters in, it becomes very difficult to impossible to boil it down to a multiple choice question. So I have examples of, for instance, a good example in estimation is how we go about in this nation conducting the US Census, which we do every 10 years. It is not remotely practical to count how many people live in America to the single, to one digit accuracy. Yet the census purports to do that. But there are lots of really interesting ways to go about that. And we've seen citizen volunteers do that are not soft. They're not, like these soft exercises tossed out to the everybody gets a prize crowd, but they're relevant to what professional mathematicians need to do. The people that really do polling is in that chapter as well. They have math experts behind the polling approaches that they take. Gallup is full of math experts. They're just not proving cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. They're having to come up with really thoughtful ways to approach sampling strategy, or how to deal with a world where nobody answers a landline anymore, or how to impute from those who will answer a cell phone what are reasonable extrapolations to represent how people actually think about something. So my point there is not a reduction in rigor. It's not softening up math. It's actually immersing us in the math that matters in our lives, and getting at the fact that the important math does actually lend itself to creativity. And you'll often hear, one of the things that got me motivated to write this book was an interview that appeared in the New Yorker with the person who headed the Education Foundation for the Gates Foundation, the Education Initiative. And the quote, this is, I think, verbatim, But the quote was, math is unique among all disciplines because in math, there is always one right answer. In the book, I have that quote. And then I follow it up with a sample inbox that has all these things related to math where there is absolutely not one right answer, you know. And I said, like, and I try to be gently respectful in the way I said it. Maybe I failed, but I said, look, the person who's making these billion-dollar grants does not understand math. And they don't understand, for instance, a really important math concept is when two data sets are correlated, why? Is it coincidental? Does one cause the other? Or is there a shared underlying causal factor? And for sure, completing calculus BC in high school has some correlation with success later in life, particularly if you measure success by whether you went to a college. So yeah, but is somebody going to be successful as an adult because they can do a closed form integral by hand? When I have taken the time to go all over the country and given talks to engineering teams at Boeing and car companies and 3D, I can't find a scientist or engineer in America doing the mechanics of high school calculus. So consider that, right? We hold out as the pinnacle of math success something that was brilliant. Credit to Newton and Leibniz for pioneering it. That was essential before we had computers, that I had to do with lead author published papers before computers were at your fingertips, that no one today does. And so when you don't understand that the only reason you see a correlation there is that the well-off families in better resource schools get more kids into calculus and then get more kids into college. So yeah, there is a correlation. It's not even that strong, it turns out, but it's not causal, right? You know, you don't find people changing the world, getting up every morning saying, how can I do a hyperbolic cosine transformation of a closed form integral today? And I think, Drew, that gets at the core issue. Do we teach kids what's important to learn? Do we challenge them in ways that draw out their distinctive gifts and talents? Or do we just continue to do what we've always done, failing to understand the world has changed completely?
Yeah, so a lot of that resonates with me. And I mean, I would not consider myself to be quote unquote good at math. And lots of people will say that. And perhaps if I was taught differently or taught better or both of those things, maybe that would be different. I saw some research just as a sort of side note recently, and I think Stephen Pinker had shared it that some of the sort of math abilities might be genetic, but that's a whole other issue. I was helping my 17-year-old with a stats class and having to realize that my math understanding and the things that I have not used in many, many years to try to help her, because I needed to sort of refresh and relearn, and of course AI and Notebook LM, those kinds of things are really great tools at that. But stats, I think, is a really great thing. I mean, it could be a really great class. There's so many applications and so many things, but you come down and you're talking about in the book things like Algebra 1. I think that's sort of a gateway class, right? And so I went on social media and I didn't get a lot of responses, interestingly, like quadratic equation, like why is it important that we would need to learn that? How do adults use that today? And what's the opportunity cost of focusing on, a quadratic equation as you must learn this kind of thing in order to matriculate and graduate and those kinds of things? And I did get, a couple of responses, which I thought were interesting. Of course, I'm sure you've heard some of these is, the thinking, it's sort of like lifting weights. It's, like the thinking that you're doing, even though you might not be using quadratic equations as an adult, that's good. And I think there's certainly some validity to that, but then you get into the opportunity cost question. But is there a reasonable case? I mean, somebody's got to know how to do quadratic equations at some point, right? Even if computers are doing it for us because we're building computers. I mean, do we want to rely on the computers and AI to do all of this for us?
Well, it can. I mean, you ask a great question of your audience, and I'm not surprised you didn't get many responses, because honestly, once you start talking about math, most people check out. But this whole thing is like the waves of defense, right? A kid will ask, when am I ever going to use it? An honest math teacher will say, once you've taken your last standardized test, you're not. That's the truth. And I do want to underscore this. It's like, think about the impact that has on a kid's view about the role of education and its purpose, right? Because once you say, hey, it's all a game and you just need to do this because it's on a test that somebody who really doesn't understand much about math anymore thinks you should do, it's very eroding of a sense of purpose and why I come to school. So first point I make. Then, okay, so maybe adults don't use it, but hey, it's teaching kids how to think. These are immensely important problem-solving strategies that they're developing. I think that's pure fiction. I think it could be that way in a very indirect, inefficient way, but it's not that way. And the only group that has ever looked at that, and think about the massive amounts of money we spend on collecting data tied to these math micromechanics, and that's billions of dollars a year. Only one group has had the funds to look at how much deeper learning, how much real problem solving is embedded in our high stakes high school math exams, the RAND Corporation. Not my number, RAND Corporation's number, 0%. So one group, 0%. So I just say, show me the evidence. Show me where kids are really learning how to problem solve, because, you mentioned statistics, right? Immensely important, although with anything really interesting, there's always the opportunity to make a mess of it. And so if you immerse kids in statistics by having to memorize what a mean, median, and mode are and compute the binomial table for things, you can make anything boring if you just set your mind to it. But, my book talks about statistics, and I talk about Moneyball. How many people were blown away by Moneyball, the movie, the book, the immense impact it's had on sports, and then rippled through to many areas where someone, in this case, Bill James, looked at a set of outdated, boring, largely unrevealing statistics and said, we can do so much better. Swap out batting average for on-base percentage, and it revolutionized baseball, right? And I start that chapter with timely because we just had the Winter Olympics. But if you had to create your own statistic based on performance for which nation won the Winter Olympics, what statistic would you use? Does that teach you how to think? I think that teaches you. And how much more of a challenge could you deliver that would teach you how to think? So what's the data you have to work with? Well, gold, silver, and bronze medals, but also what are statistics around the country, right? How big is it? What's its GDP, per capita income? How many kids per, a million different things that would let you create your own very revealing Moneyball statistic for which nation actually won the Winter Olympics. And so I just say, it's a failure of our imagination, right? Statistics can be glorious and interesting and captivating and revealing. And Moneyball showed us that. And Moneyball changed the way most businesses think about it. And we need just to bake that into school. And I show in that chapter, and I was just trading notes with him, but this teacher I came across named Charles Castens, who's in Kansas, teaching math to grade 3 through 5 kids in a Title I school, getting them so energized about math through fantasy sports. It's how cool, right? And kids will look at it and say, oh, that's it. I care about that. That's relevant. That's interesting. So the opportunities are there. But if we ignore statistics, which many kids will go all the way through high school, never having taken it, or, spent, 3 days on it in, somewhere along the lines, all dumbed down to be mean, median, and mode, or what's the definition of a standardized distribution or whatever, which you use for a day or two and then you forget, versus all these really interesting statistics-based ways to use available data to capture and synthesize a number that tells you something important. How cool is that, right? Why is it, and it's logic and it's rigor, and, you can't arm wave your way through it, but it also taps your creativity and connects the math you're learning in school to the real world and its consequences. That's the world we need to live in.
So you're making a distinction between what we should be teaching in class in high school, essentially, right? And maybe K-12 writ large, but mostly high school, I think. And you'll correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the distinction between what we should teach, but then in some ways also maybe talking a bit about how we should teach. And, again, some of these science of learning conversations and cognitive science, one of the things that they will often say, and I think there's certainly some truth to this when we talk about short-term memory, long-term memory, cognitive load, these kinds of things, is that creativity really requires knowledge. I don't think that's necessarily true, but deep and great creativity or great critical thinking does mean you need some knowledge. I think you can clearly think critically without knowledge, but it's not very deep. And so the mode that they advocate for is to build that knowledge and build those things before then going and applying it like to Moneyball or something like that. And so it's a sort of an algorithmic kind of approach of do this, then that. And I think what you're proposing is something more aligned with what I advocate for, which is using inquiry and using big questions, and project-based learning is a way to do that. It's not the only way to do that. And I'm reminded of Dylan William, who's been a podcast guest and part of some conversations. He's an educational thought leader and researcher and these kinds of things. And one of the things that he mentioned is, that we've got certainly a need to really focus on explicit instruction, because there's an efficiency there that may not be that may be a problem if we sort of are doing more inquiry and conceptual stuff, because you're taking more time and kids aren't learning all of the things that they might need to be successful, which is, there's certainly some nuance in that statement there. But there's another side of that, which I think you're pointing to, which is at least one other side of that is that, as he says, that we can't possibly teach all of the things that kids will need to know as an adult. And so if students are leaving K-12 with a sort of diminished sense of curiosity and interest in learning, and certainly math qualifies as that, right? As you mentioned, and I don't think it's any secret, people go, I hate math. I'm so glad I don't have to do math anymore. Those kinds of things, right? Then we're losing them as sort of lifelong learners, as people who will say, okay, I learned a lot in K-12, but certainly not enough. And how do I learn more? I want to learn more, and having that sort of mindset. And so I'm curious how you think about that balance between something that's more really foundational knowledge building and perhaps explicit instruction versus something that's a bit more inquiry and big questions and that kind of thing, and some of the trade-offs there.
Yeah. Well, I'd start with what every classroom teacher understands. And I want to be clear. I do not ever hold myself out as an education expert, but I've worked really hard to learn from the people in the classrooms, in leadership positions in schools, to understand their perspective and what their takeaways were over and over again. I mean, start with this macro headline. If kids are bored, they'll never learn. And if kids are engaged, they learn at warp speed. And we've sort of bought into this myth in our schools, largely driven by our data, our obsession with data and standardized tests. But we've sort of bought into the view that we need year after year, layer after layer of fundamental content, and then kind of cross our fingers and hope kids can do something with it. And yet have spent almost no time or money trying to understand how much of that fundamental content is retained. And whenever anybody does look at that, they reach the same conclusion, that if you're just shoving something into short-term memory for a test and then moving to some other thing you've got to shove into short-term memory, never applying it, never seeing the relevance, never really even caring about it, it's gone in a matter of weeks, maybe days, maybe hours. And you'll see, we had this great scene in Most Likely to Succeed, that film, where the teacher says, well, my kids will come in for help, but they don't want to come in until the day before the exam so that they can have it fresh in their mind. They can hold it together for 24 hours to say it back on the exam and then move on. And so, but I like to contrast this. It's like there is no if about killing kids' creativity and curiosity and agency. I mean, that's exactly what the model was designed to do, and it does it. And so I love to contrast my experiences observing high school classes where honestly, about the only question I ever hear kids ask in high school, and there are exceptions, and I try to highlight those in my book and my films, but by and large, the only questions I will hear high school kids ask is some variant of, will this be on the test? Then I go to kindergarten and first grade classes where kids are asking a million questions. The point I make to people is, if you want to see content retention engines, spend time with a 5-year-old who's gotten really interested in dinosaurs or reptiles or action heroes or whatever. I mean, they are content sponges, right? I mean, a kid that loves dinosaurs can spell stegosaurus, right? So it's not that kids can't absorb content. It's that once they're engaged and excited, that content becomes meaningful, and they will actually, given enough time and given enough kind of prodding and poking to say, could you do this? How about this? How about that? The action of a great teacher, right? The importance of teachers in the role of the development of human potential, they retain that content. And I think that's where we've totally missed the boat. And I think math is just the perfect example, right? It's like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, all these layers of content. When kids say, will I ever use it? The honest answer is probably not, or definitely not. No connection to the outside world. And used in a way that ranks and sorts kids and often punishes most kids. And I just think we have it all wrong. And so it's not math that matters later in life. It's not math that sparks engagement. It's not math that's ever mastered. It's just this endless series of math hoops we put kids through that honestly, and quite appropriately, causes them to view school not as an important way for them to develop their potential, but as a game to, of hoops to jump through. And at a certain point, many kids just say, I'm not good at this game, or I don't believe in this game, and they defect. And it's heartbreaking, right? It's heartbreaking. And we do it for one simple reason, right? We care so much more about data than we do about our kids. And yet, when you look at the data that we glorify, which are basically math and reading scores for kids all along the way, having turned the entirety of school into chasing those scores, the scores are flat. We've had no progress on the wrong goals. And so when people tell me, oh, I'm uncomfortable with what you're saying, or like, should we really ask kids to come up with different ways to estimate how many trees are within a 1-mile radius of where they are right now? Or, things that kids, I think, find really interesting. And they say, no, they need all these fundamental layers of content. I say, like, convince me it's working, because I see enormous amounts of evidence that it is failing in a spectacular way. And 72-point font bold, AI will make it that much worse.
So you're talking about engagement, and it reminds me of a blog piece that I wrote that was sort of pulling from a Brookings Institute study and report, and they talk about the different kinds of engagement. They break it down into 4 sort of modes: resistor mode and passenger mode, and you can probably guess what those folks are like. Yeah. But the last 2 are achiever mode and explorer mode. And so the achiever mode are these students who are sort of compliant, right? That are going to do what we ask them as teachers and as educators. They may not like it, they may not want to do it, but they know that they need to get an A to matriculate to college or whatever. The parents might punish them, or there's a number of different ways to incentivize or disincentivize there. But then the explorer mode is the sort of pinnacle, as they talk about. They get good grades, but they're sort of deeply involved and engaged in their own learning. They're trying to become self-directed learners in some ways, and that's sort of the pinnacle. And I think that's kind of what you're after there. I guess maybe one of the things that I'll push back a little bit just as sort of devil's advocate here, because I think it's interesting in this conversation towards engagement, which behavioral engagement, cognitive engagement, academic engagement, intellectual engagement. One of the things that I have been critical of the sort of more, let's say, progressive, constructivist, project-based learning inquiry end of the spectrum is the sort of idea that if we just make it engaging, that the students will learn. And I talked with Howard Gardner, about he wrote a couple really actually they're sort of anthologies of his work, and I appreciated him saying that progressive educators have probably been a bit too idealistic in terms of, if you just sort of build it, they will come, is sort of create the conditions that they will learn. And so, when we work with project-based learning, with teachers in schools on project-based learning, we want to really make sure that we are building that significant knowledge, that we are mixing explicit instruction and an inquiry and collaboration and those kinds of things. So do you have any sort of fears or concerns about the sort of Sir Ken Robinson kind of mode, which of course the science of learning, he's not a somebody they would hold up in high esteem, right? That maybe there's a risk of emphasizing the engagement piece a bit too much, than leaving what I would say sort of dazzle over depth or TikTok worthy kinds of projects that look fun and seem fun and that kind of thing, but kids are maybe not learning the real things that we might be hoping that they would learn.
Yeah. Well, I do want to take a second to talk about Sir Ken, because as you know, and maybe listeners, some may know, he and I worked together for 3 years. And, you watch his talks. I hope everybody here has watched his Do Schools Kill Creativity talk. Still, 20 years later, still the most watched TED Talk of all time. And people will say, gosh, he's so wonderful and charming and funny in that talk. Is he like that in real life? So I'm here to say, yes. Sir Ken was every bit as wonderful on a daily basis working together as he was in that talk. And I think Sir Ken, if he were here on this, would say exactly what I'm going to say, is there's an enormous difference between none, some, and all. And should creativity, should curiosity, should audacity be at least some of the school experience for all kids? We would be emphatically in the category of yes. Right now, for most kids, it is none. And for my kids, my preference is it would be very close to all. But I don't think you could possibly defend none, because, and I like your framework of this, achievers, if you're an achiever listening to this, or you're the parent of an achiever, or you're teaching in a school where you hope to produce achievers, listen carefully to what I am about to say. Achievers will be unemployable going forward. Unemployable. And if you are a young adult and you can't pursue or create a career path, bad things happen. And why do I say that? The essence of school is carry out knowledge worker assignments. That is it. Like, that is what almost every kid in American schools today is valued for. That is what we value on our high stakes exams. Can you, in a time frame that's actually pretty limited, carry out some variant of a knowledge worker assignment? And that's what AI does perfectly. And I don't care how hard you work at school. I don't care whether you're the valedictorian as a carry out knowledge worker assignment person or near the bottom of your class. Nobody wants to hire that kid. You're already seeing college grads saying, I did everything right and nobody wants to hire me. It is serious today, and it is going to get unbelievably serious quickly, because the pace of advance of AI, I don't hold myself up as an education expert. I've worked hard. Let me correct that.
You can swear.
I worked my ass off to learn from people who are. I respect them. I love their dedication. I love their commitment. I'm a cheerleader for those that are working really hard to transform education priorities, but I don't consider myself an education expert. I am an innovation expert. I've been side by side with this since 1975. We have gone in the exponential growth curve from the flat, generally trending up, to the up at a rate that no one can imagine. And so as good as it is today, I mean, my friends who are immersed in this tell me that its progress is measured in days, not years. It is getting so good because unbelievably talented people are using AI to make AI that much better. And I promise you, if you're listening, and please listen and take this to heart, if you are an adult with a skill set largely around carrying out a knowledge worker assignment, game over. And it is an enormous problem for a family, for an adult, for a community, for a state, and for a nation. Knowledge worker assignment delivering adults are on their way out. And so that to me says, like, how can we live in a world where the role of creativity and curiosity and agency and audacity is basically none of student experience? So you can deliver an interesting argument for why it shouldn't be all, but don't tell me it should be none. And if we don't take that to heart, we are going to be in, we're letting these kids down. I mean, these 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-olds, they look up at adults, they trust us to make good decisions. And when we tell them you just do all this stuff and jump through these hoops and work really hard and graduate high in your high school class rank and then go to college, maybe borrow a ton of money, work really hard, get that college degree, it will all work out for you. It will not all work out for most kids who do that. And, I could talk a little bit. We've got a new film out, Multiple Choice. We show a school that had the courage and vision to rethink priorities. Back to Howard Gardner, think of all the different ways we can be talented and gifted. The film shows all kids immersed in career-based learning. I think a way better term, by the way, than project-based learning, career-based learning. And so whether you are thinking or planning to go to college or not, these kids are working side by side on carpentry, on welding, on cybersecurity, on healthcare, on digital media, on AI, learning from each other, understanding and appreciating the way we are all quite different in our skills and aptitude, but largely future-proofing those kids in a world where AI gets so good at the routine knowledge worker task. It's a great time, actually. I mean, many parents would like, oh my gosh, what do I do? My kid says they want to be a plumber. It's going to be a fantastic time, particularly a plumber with business skills and entrepreneurial capabilities. I like, watch out. They're going to do really well in life. A kid that is really good at leveraging AI to create opportunity or solve problems tied to academic disciplines, they can do amazing things. I'm just telling you. And I've been pretty friggin' accurate in my predictions. You can go back to the very beginning of Most Likely to Succeed. We finished filming in 2014. We lay out exactly what's going to happen. Computers beating Kasparov in chess. Watson beating Ken Jennings in Jeopardy, with Ken saying what's going to happen when millions of people can't plug into meaningful employment. And they've been replaced by computers. We show computers writing better prose than most journalists. And we say this has profound implications for what we do and what our priorities are in school. And Ken Robinson delivers the telling quotes on that. And so hold me to that. Look at, we'll put it in the show notes. Watch the first 15 minutes. Ask yourself, does this guy know what he's talking about or not when it comes to innovation? I know what I'm talking about. And if you are just a hoop jumping knowledge worker assignment carrying out kid, turning into that as an adult, it's going to be very, very painful for you.
Yeah, my brother works in marketing, and one thing that I remember him saying a few years ago was that the sort of new hires that he was getting from more Ivy League kinds of universities and things, they tended to be less of a sort of self-starter, being able to figure out how to solve a problem. Somebody who came from maybe community college or non-Ivy, which is, I think, alluding to kind of what you're talking about, right?
No,
the idea, because those Ivy tend to be, building that knowledge, and there's a sort of formulaic kind of approach. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the career-based versus project-based. And one of the things that when we talk about project-based learning, and one of the reasons I think inquiry and project-based learning is really important, and there are several reasons that I advocate for it, but one, which is you have a driving question and then you develop a need to know list, which is, I think, fundamental to being successful as an adult. Like when I'm faced with a novel problem, challenge, whatever it might be as an adult, and we're all going to have those.
Yep.
that how do I figure out if I don't have knowledge, if I don't have much understanding of it, whether it's healthcare, and I've talked about that as an example, but there's, a number of things. How do I buy a house? How do I figure out how to advise my own children in their, advocate their vocation and those kinds of things? What are the questions and things that I might need to know? And how do I identify those things and do that well? And I think that project-based learning is a way to sort of model that and build that skill, which unfortunately doesn't show up easily in metrics and testing and those kinds of things. So it doesn't get prioritized in lots of schools and sort of, again, in the cognitive science world. I'm curious, one of the things that I sort of chuckle about is that the sort of more traditional people tend to say that inquiry and progressive education is hegemonic, and people on the other end say that traditional teaching is sort of hegemonic. And obviously both can't be true. One has to be more hegemonic than the other. But I do think that I think it's important that schools and that we recognize that there are different desired academic outcomes. And if you as a parent and I guess as a student want that really traditional education, then fine. That's something that I think is worth noting as, hey, if it's out there and it's an option, that kind of thing. And this is maybe a good opportunity to talk about the new film, because you started alluding to it. What are some of the examples and places, schools that are doing something that's a bit more, whether it's career based or project based or inquiry, that you can talk about?
Yeah, or in my book, What School Could Be, right? All 50
Mhm.
states, 200 schools, a whole set of, probably 75 different school experiences I observed and write about that in one way, shape, or form were doing really interesting things, a bit rogue from the traditional model that help kids develop skills and mindsets that would serve them well later in life. Boom. Most likely to succeed, ditto. Showing kids immersing themselves in cross-disciplinary projects, big challenges, developing skills and mindsets that will serve them well as adults. I funded a film called She Started It, about young female entrepreneurs and unleashing their capability to take on important problems in their world. Ditto with this new film, Multiple Choice, where you start with a sense of purpose, right? Helping kids understand, like, if I don't think I'm going to write another book, at least right now, having just gotten one out. I'm not like getting up every morning saying, bring on book 4. And maybe I'll change my mind. But if I did, I'd write a book it would be something like, what if the purpose of school were purpose? And what if we really use those precious, for most people, free years of 1 through 12 or 13 years K through 12 to help kids understand the world around them, to understand skills and mindsets they could have to help them create opportunities or solve problems, and to really empower them to move forward and to be just as excited if a kid gets turned on by being a firefighter. We have one student in the film, Multiple Choice, who finds his lane as a firefighter, or carpentry. We have 2 kids in the film that just didn't want to be in school, but once they found their way to the carpentry lab, that did it for them. They're going to end up doing quite well as adults. We have a kid who loved welding and carpentry, but is now in public policy at University of Virginia. Fantastic, right? But I think one of the most important things, and this would be for parents listening, is, and this comes up, is often a divergence between the goals of the parent and what works for the kid. And you might have a kid who loves the ideas of school, who kind of just can go through it and not be working every night till 1 a.m. and grinding themselves into submission. But it just is like really interesting and enjoyable for them to dive into the academic context of things. Fantastic. And maybe that kid goes on to a really selective college. Fantastic. Even better if they understand what they want to get out of college and graduate without an enormous amount of debt. So I'm not anti that path. I think that's fantastic. I also am absolutely enthusiastic about a kid who says, I'm not really into academics, but I really found my passion in woodworking. And they go on to be, a fantastic, carpenter in their area. Even better if they have business finance skills and are entrepreneurial, then they go on to run a contracting firm and do really well. There are a lot of things that I'm excited about. what I'm not excited about is the war that's often waged between parents and a kid to push that kid to get slightly better GPA, to do a whole set of extracurriculars that the kid has no interest in, that they think will appeal to a college admissions officer, all because they want the right decal on the back of their car. And I think we see an epidemic of absolutely eviscerated student mental health, largely because we have academic tracks with that bell curve, right? So most kids are not in the upper tier, that's very thin at the upper edge bell curve. Most kids are being told you're not proficient. You're kind of a mediocre middle kid, or you're a tail end kid. And we don't have a lot of hope for you in life. Maybe get on the bus and go to the vocational ed school, or, double dose tutoring and more drills and worksheets and all this bullshit we have tried for years to address the academic achievement gap, when we actually are pursuing the wrong academic goals, right? I mean, of course it doesn't close. Of course the test scores are flat. When you're on a failed mission, things don't get better on their own. And so to me, helping kids find their lane, explore and understand what turns them on, helping them connect those dots to their passion in a way to support themselves in an interesting career, and making sure we cover aspects, right? And you'll see in the film, right? I mean, think of the mess we've made of civics education in America. I mean, look no further than the problems we're dealing with in America today.
This is a serious passion project of mine right now.
It should be. And I really admire your focus on that, because chasing higher math and reading scores has largely pushed civics to the sideline. And then our obsession with multiple choice exams and content coverage mean, you'll spend a day memorizing the three branches of government, or executive, judicial, and legislative. And we have US senators who don't know that. We have half the adults in America don't know that. It's like, how could we make that even worse? In the film, you'll see these kids not studying and memorizing and then forgetting the three branches of government, but doing these initiatives that make their world better. A kid getting really good in healthcare, who derives enormous personal satisfaction from helping adults in her world that need her assistance and expertise. Kids building things. Like one of the kids in the film who did find his lane with carpentry. It's not in the film, but I brought him up to Rhode Island for a premiere. He gets up on the stage, blows away the audience. Just a great kid, Luis. And he explains, not in the film, but true, that he's now overseeing the construction of 12 affordable housing units in Winchester, Virginia. I mean, is that not an immensely important citizenship lesson? And so I'm all for understanding the three branches of government. Boy, am I. Actually, in our country today, I might like to get rid of one or two of them, maybe all three, the way it's working. But I asked the question of, should we think we've had some success because we spent one class period on legislative, judicial, and executive branches, tested them on, name the three branch, which of these four are the three branches of government, legislative, executive, judicial, the National Zoo. They picked the National Zoo as not being in a branch of government, which basically, I was there earlier the week, I might turn over the reins of government to the National Zoo. But is one of the most important elements of citizenship to help kids understand the immense personal satisfaction of getting good at something that helps make their community better. Yeah. And I just say, am I saying all? I'm not saying all, but I'm sure as heck saying some. That would be an important thing and gift we can give to our kids coming K through 12, is developing a skill and applying it in ways that they can see, my gosh, I got good at this and it made my community better. Could be an op-ed, could be music they compose, it could be a play they put on, could be all the things that kids say is where they really learned in school, an after school activity, or, they're now the media expert for the sports team or whatever, a million different ways. I mean, but good at something that equips you with a hireable skill where you can look at it and be proud that you actually made your world better. Should that be all? I'd like it to be mostly close to all. Should it be some? It sure as hell should be some. And for most kids, it's none.
Yeah, so I won't go deep in the weeds here, and maybe we can talk about it, off mic. But one of my side projects and passion projects is, and I've actually moved to our main PD site is WeGrowTeachers.com, but then ThoughtStretchers.org, and trying to sort of build and launch this Thought Stretchers School of Civic Thought, because I think Enlightenment civics is something we have done such a poor job of teaching over the years. And while, yes, we do need to know the three branches of government and things like that, we really need to understand the sort of dynamics behind it and the importance of pluralism and free speech and the things that come with what I would say is Enlightenment civics. So, I'll put that link in the show notes.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that there's two questions that I'm curious about that are not connected, but I want to make sure that I say them so that I don't forget them. One is I'm remembering from Most Likely to Succeed some of the characters, and you have these kids creating these intricate things, and I'm wondering if you've kept up with any of them to see like what are they doing now? How have their lives turned out, and good, bad, and ugly ways, and then also what are the sort of, in your mind, it's sort of like what we should be teaching in math. What are the sort of foundational pieces that in math instruction in K-12, like where do you see the sort of divergence from, all right, all or most kids should have this, and then maybe not all or most kids should have that?
Yeah. Well, on the students from the film, I'll put in your show notes. We did a session, maybe it was a year ago-ish. It all blurs together with Brian and Samantha, who were the two lead students in the film. And but sometimes I get hazy on the specifics, but Brian went on to be a film major. Interesting, right? And Samantha, I want to say, was studying astrophysics or something. And so, in this whole thing, like project-based learning, it doesn't prepare you for college and whatever else. I think where there's a disconnect, it's that it doesn't prepare you for boring first-year lecture courses with fact-based multiple choice recall exams, but it does prepare you to learn and pursue your passions. And so we can put that in. So we do stay in touch with those kids. And, they both went on the college path. I stay in touch with the kids from multiple choice. We have a kid in there, this is worth mentioning, Malachi. I don't think he would have ever finished high school, finds a firefighter's academy, graduates from high school because he had a reason to go to school. After the film's locked, so it's not in the film, we learn that Malachi gets a job as a firefighter with the local fire department. Fantastic. We also learned that the last 2 years of high school, Malachi and his mom lived in a car, and they can now live in a place with a roof over their head. So, help them find their lane, connect it to a reasonable to really good career path. These kids are determined and they do want better lives for themselves. And so on the math, I'm working on ways to turn the book into a course. As I say, each chapter starts with something that middle or even elementary school kids have done that I've observed or helped make happen. And, to me, what we owe every kid is not 3 or 4 years of math that they honestly will never use, or maybe a tiny sliver may go on to pursue careers that involve abstract symbolic math. In my book, I make the point that the number of people in America earning a living because they're really good at the abstract formalism of math is about the same as the number who are dental hygienists. And I say, we don't make plaque removal half of our high stakes exams. And I think we can make every bit as good a case that plaque removal teaches you how to problem solve as proving the cosine squared plus sine squared theta equals 1. But would I rather have every kid coming through school with the requirement being understand the powerful math ideas that are going to, in many ways, determine what you read, what you watch, and what you believe. The math ideas that will enter into your most important financial and healthcare decisions. The math that underscores whether civil society holds together or falls apart. Understand those ideas. Develop a math mindset that you use every day as you encounter numbers and studies and interesting phenomena. And then if you really love the math symbolic, abstract symbolism, offer as an elective ways to go deep with that. have side initiatives where if you're really interested in carpentry, you'll learn the math that goes with carpentry. Or if you want to be an architect, you'll learn that math in ways that you apply it, see its relevance, and actually retain it. But I'd rather have every kid coming out of K through 12 understanding the math ideas that will rule their life, and let the current body be an elective for kids who think they want to go deep with math as kind of the theoretical abstract math that is needed in some careers, which, by the way, I benefited from. I'm not saying it's zero. I'm just saying it's like 1%. It can't be half of our high stakes accountability when it's a tiny number of professions, right? And so understand the ideas, get really excited about math. I think we'd actually have more kids that wanted to pursue math and engineering careers if early on we said, hey, it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's interesting. But we don't do that, right? We mostly discourage kids, pound the heck out of them with stuff that they don't see relevance in, ask our teachers to do what is near mission impossible. And then we pay enormous consequences for that.
So I'm mindful of time. I'm going to wrap us up, but I want to, sort of comment. And you talked about short-term memory, long-term memory. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And one of the things that I think is, we were talking about storage and then retrieval, right? Can you retrieve it? Which is, can you retrieve it in a number of different ways? And I think inquiry is a way. And these sort of project-based learning kinds of experiences, inquiry experiences, are ways in which you can build different kinds of connections, which then makes it more retrievable. So when you're talking, I'm hearing, some of the sort of, in cognitive science of learning sort of advocacy crowd, they're probably, I'm wondering, they're probably wondering, like, oh, does he think kids should like have their multiplication tables memorized? So, like, is that something that you would advocate for, or how do you think about those kinds of things?
Well, within certain spheres, yes. Like would I like kids to understand what it means to have 3 different instances of 7 items? Like do I think that 7 times 3 should just be a calculator thing or a Siri thing? No, I'm not saying that. So I'm not completely, out of my mind on some of these fundamentals. But do I think that we should be having kids do, divide 1,872 into 6,487,221 and be marked down for not getting the remainder correct? I mean, no, or do I think that it's really important for a kid? Okay, so this will veer into a point of controversy. Do we really need kids to be able to add 1/3 plus 1/5 plus 1/23 by hand? Like, I don't think so. No. I mean, like, my test here is, if it's something no adult ever does, then that shouldn't be mandatory for a kid. And yet it is, right? And you'll see this, it actually starts remarkably early, where, because what we reward in math is not so much understanding the ideas and being able to apply them with a degree of logic and creativity. What we reward is speed and accuracy under time pressure. And you see it in these tests that happen quite early, whether it's an informal exam for second graders on, can you add 30, sums together accurately without mistakes in 3 minutes? Oh, you could, you're a great math student. Oh, you can't, we're worried about you. Because that early feedback tends to be self-fulfilling, right? You tell a kid you're a great math kid, they will believe that, they'll do better. You tell a kid you're not very good at math, you've got problems, they'll believe that and they won't do as well. And if it's all around doing low-level things quickly and accurately by hand under time pressure, you're basically saying you got to be doing the same thing computers do perfectly. And if it's more, hey, here's a jar, a glass vase with a whole set of jelly beans or gummy bears in it. What are 10 different ways you could go about estimating how many jelly beans are in that jar? And listening to their approaches and understanding, is it well thought out? Can they articulate why that might make sense? You know where I am on that, right? So I'll take every minute we spend on how do you add 1/3 plus 1/5 plus 1/23 by hand and reallocate that to how you go about, in a thoughtful, interesting way, estimating jelly beans in a jar, or predicting the world's population in the year 2100, or understanding what your risk level is if you go drive home with somebody after a party and you know that person's been drinking, or a million different things in my book that can make or break the lives of our young adults that they would find relevant and interesting, that you can hold them to a high standard. But boy, when they ask, will I ever use it? The answer is abso-friggin-lutely. So I'm doing better on the language. But you can look them in the face and say, this actually could make or break your life going forward. Yes, you do need to understand this and get good at it, because this will come into your life every single friggin' day. And if they say, why do I need to be able to add a third to it? You know, it's like, I don't know. It's because it's an easy multiple choice question. Like we can do so much better than that.
So the book is Aftermath. The film is multiple choice. We'll make sure to put links in the show notes. Other things that you want to mention, anything that we didn't talk about, links, places they should go, that kind of thing?
You know, I would definitely love any love or support on the book. You know, I will say this, my challenge is when you say to somebody a book about math, they immediately go to something that they had a bad experience with, most people. And then when you say, wait, it's a book about math that has almost no equations in it, you know, a book that's written in the style of Freakonomics, explaining these really interesting ideas with words and charts, with all sorts of real world examples, people are suddenly like, oh, that might be really interesting. And I am getting, Drew, feedback where people say, you know, I got it, and it was on my coffee table or my bedside table, and my 12-year-old grabbed it, and I can't get it away from them. So like if you've got a kid that's checking out on math, maybe think about it for them. But I do feel it's really an important book. And so I hope people will read that. And the last thing, and sort of closing the loop on challenges we all faced, I have zero patience for somebody that says, well, it will take us a long time to change school. And my answer is, let's just go back in time, like to maybe March 14th, 2020. How long did it take us to change almost every aspect of school when we thought the future of kids and their health may be overreaction, but in retrospect, with the risk being so high, I can tolerate some overreaction. But we changed everything about school in 2 weeks when we thought it was really important, when we thought the future of our kids and their lives were on the line. It's way more important today. You know, like this is going to determine whether kids have futures and whether civil society survives. So don't tell me it's going to take years. You know, don't tell me it's a slow, you know, don't tell me we got to work this. I mean, like all of those things are just soft rationalizations that people will serve up so they don't face the real problem. And the real problem is we bury kids in a bunch of stuff that's easy to test and not important to learn. We're not preparing them for healthy, thriving adult lives. And they trust us, and we are letting them down.
All right. Well, I think I had seen, and I don't remember where, somebody had talked about the book as something like a love letter to math. And again, I don't remember who that was, but if you are interested in a love letter to math, because who isn't, check out the book, and it's on Amazon and all the other places. Any links you want to mention for the film?
We'll put to the film and my website. I'm easy to find there. People will understand they won't find another Ted Dintersmith online. There's one.
All right. Well, Ted, as always, it's a pleasure to talk.
And thanks for what you're doing, Drew. I love it.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, bye.